Today I'm going to take you through a full dynamic warm-up for a lower or upper body day. There's going to be components of this are more geared towards the upper body, but they're still going to be applicable for the lower body movements. And there's also going to be things that are more specific to the lower body movements that you may want to remove on an upper body day. However, if you have mobility issues, if you have pain in your low back, if you have achy knees, if you have anything like that, I still recommend going through something like this for the lower body on an upper body day, because it's that consistent frequency of doing the mobility and doing the dynamic stretches that really relieves the pain and the issue that you're going through. So the first part of any dynamic warm-up should be to get your core temperature up. I literally want to get my heart rate moving, not pacing too hard. I'm not fatiguing myself, but I want to get moving. I want to get my core temperature up, especially if you're in a place like this, Washington. It's freezing cold in our gym. So because of that, I want to heat my core temperature up. I want to warm up my joints, and I want to get moving. For that, you're going to spend about 5 minutes on the treadmill. Usually what I like to do is walk slow, pick up the pace to a fast pace, and then eventually I'm jogging by the end of the 5 minutes. Or you can pick an assault bike, you can drag a sled, you can pick a rower, elliptical. It does not matter. The goal is not to fatigue you, it's to simply warm up your body with your core temperature, get your heart rate going, and warm up your joints a little bit. Now that my core temperature is up, I got my heart rate up a little bit, I got my body literally warm from a temperature standpoint, and my joints feel a little bit loose. Now I'm gonna start moving into mobility. When I do a warm-up with a client or with myself, I like to combine mobility and dynamic stretching together. We know that static stretching, simply holding a stretch for 30, 40, 50, 60 seconds long prior to exercise, can actually limit our performance and what we can lift inside the gym. So we don't want to do that. However, dynamic stretching may have a good role in relieving some pain, in implementing more range of motion to encourage more range of motion in your strength training and avoid injury. Plus, it just feels really good. But the combination of mobility and stretching together tends to be a great dynamic warm-up. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're going to stretch all across your shin and your calf. So I really wanna stretch everything around your ankle, even the top of your foot. We're gonna really stretch that, and then we're gonna mobilize it. So for the stretching portion, this is gonna get pretty uncomfortable. But what I'm gonna do is rotate my hips, drop the top of my foot to the floor, and I'm really trying to get as low as I can without bending my knees too much. What I'm doing is stretching the top of my foot into my ankle up to my shin as much as possible. And I'm just trying to get the top of my foot flat to the floor. I'm gonna hold that for about a second, and then I turn and rotate to the other side. You're gonna feel a very deep stretch on the top of your foot. It's gonna feel discomfort, but it's gonna actually feel pretty good as well, and it's gonna open things up. Once we go through the stretch, then we're gonna go into actual mobilization. And for the mobilization, we typically wanna have a foam roller, a wall, something in front of you that you're aiming your knee towards. So I wanna maximize this plantar and dorsiflexion of my ankle by leaning as far forward as I can, which is gonna stretch my calf, and it's gonna really encourage this flexion of my ankle, right? And so I can push this pretty far without lifting my heel, so I'm actually gonna scoot this out a little bit. So I just want to be able to tap it. And then I'm going to move all the way back. Reach back forward for it without lifting up my heel. What we don't want is this. We don't want to lift up the heel. We want to keep that heel planted so we get that stretch and then come right back. All I'm doing is literally opening up that ankle joint. Back and forth. Then I would switch sides and I'd rotate to this next side. Lean forward as far as I can with it, keeping that heel planted. This is a very simple ankle mobility drill that you can do about 10 reps per side with after doing 5 to 10 reps per side of the stretch. Another simple trick that you can use throughout the day if you really struggle with ankle mobility is simply spelling the alphabet with your feet throughout the day under your desk. So if you're at work, sit there, letter A, letter B, letter C, letter D, letter E. You can spell the alphabet. And when you do that, you're taking this ball and socket joint through the whole range of motion it possibly has. Your ankle's moving in every direction, which is really going to encourage more range of motion, more mobility, and really open up that joint for you. Now that we've accomplished opening up our ankles, we're going to work on our hips. The hips are a much more complex, but also a very complicated situation or area for a lot of people. A lot of people just have tight hips, they have tight hip flexors, they have tight glutes, they have inactive glutes, they're quad dominant, they have tight adductors or inactive adductors, they have growing issues. The list goes on, but a lot of times this is what causes a lot of back pain. So before we go in squat or deadlift or do any type of lower body movement, run, anything, we want to make sure that we're taking care of our hips before we get into that. So before we get into the mobility and the stretching, I actually want to work on tissue quality first. So we're going to use a foam roller to break up some of the tissue and just loosen things up. This is going to have a neurological effect, but it's also going to encourage more range of motion in this session. Now, foam rolling isn't a magic bullet to pain relief or to better performance, but it can be something that temporarily improves that range of motion and performance. And if I can improve today's session, I'm going to. So the first place we want to foam roll is going to be our quad. Our quad's going to go up into our rectus femoris, which is going to go up into our hip flexors. We want to really just work on this whole thing. Most people are tight here. We tend to sit at home and watch TV, and then we get in our car and drive to work, and then we sit at our desk, and then we go to SoulCycle and sit on a bike. We're just constantly in this flex state, so our hip flexors are just tight. We need to create extension in our hips, and we need to relieve that tissue quality around the hips and the quad. So I'm literally just going to keep it simple. We're going to go through these really quick, and I'm just rolling my quad. So what we're going to do is go up and down, really simple. If you want to apply more pressure, it's pretty damn simple. Put that weight on it by crossing your other leg and just keep rolling. Next, I'm going to have you literally straddle this foam roller. So it's going to get a little awkward here, but that's okay. What we want to do is actually work our adductors. This is something that can get really tight for a lot of people. And if you don't take care of the tissue quality here or learn how to properly activate your adductors, you are going to run into some issues with your growing, and potentially even worse. So like sports hernias, things like that. So what we want to do is avoid causing those things that can lead up to bigger issues or simple joint pain. For this, I'm literally going to straddle it from the side, and I'm just putting pressure, rolling back and forth. And this is one of those ones that really does not feel pleasant, but it's extremely important. And we're gonna stretch all these right after we really mobilize that tissue. The last thing we're gonna foam roll is the glutes. So this one's pretty simple as well. I'm gonna sit on one side at a time. That way I can just focus on one glute and I can really open up my hip. So what I wanna do is lean on this right glute, cross that leg, and let that knee kind of fall. I don't need to apply pressure to it, but I just wanna let it fall so I really open up that hip, and I'm just working the entire glute. So sometimes it's good to get some circular motion in here because there's a lot going on with the glute. The glute is a very big muscle, and you wanna be able to hit all the surrounding tissues. So really working the parafemoris, up into that TFL on the side of your hip, and just working everything you can all around that glute region. Now, we're gonna stretch everything we just did. So now that we've really tried to mobilize that tissue, I want to take that tissue through a full range of motion, and I wanna dynamically stretch it. So the first thing is gonna be the hip flexors. This one, again, is very simple, very similar to the ankle mobility that we did. And what you can do is elevate this back foot up here on a bench or something like that to encourage more hip extension, but it's not required. All I wanna do here is put my foot forward, so it's not a 90-degree angle with my knee yet, and I'm gonna lean forward into it as low as I can and really squeeze my glute. As I squeeze my glute and keep my abs tight, my ribcage down, my entire hip flexor is really gonna open up. And all I wanna do is kind of create a dynamic pumping motion with it, right? I'm leaning into it, squeezing the glute, trying to really stretch that hip flexor. Once I get about 5 to 10 of those, or whenever I feel as if it is warmed up or stretched, I'm gonna move to the next side. And that's something important to realize, is that a warm-up should be pretty intuitive. I'm not gonna give my client exact reps or exact times because everybody takes a different amount of time to open up, loosen up, and get ready for a training session. So make sure you're really staying intuitive and listening to your body. If you need more, keep going. If you don't need as much, pull back. And for certain movements and muscle groups and joints, you're gonna need more attention than others. Next, we're going to do adductor stretches with rock backs. This one, I'm gonna get in a quadruped position. I'm actually going to extend my leg as far as I can. When I do that, I'm kind of in a side lunge position. Big adductor stretch here because I'm locking that knee out. So if I keep my knee bent, I get a lot of tension in my upper hip. If I lock it out, all that tension and stretching goes right into my quad. And I'm actually gonna push back onto this left heel. I don't have a great range of motion on this side because that left knee is where I had surgery, but getting enough to move through this motion and really stretch that. Once I get, again, 5 to 10 of those, switch this side, and now I'm able to push back a little bit further. This is my good knee. All I'm trying to do is sit back to this heel. I'm keeping this foot as straight as possible. I don't want it out. I want to keep it straight, knee locked out, and I'm just trying to sit back into those hips. And the deeper I sit, the bigger that stretch is going to be. All right, last one for the hips. We're going to stretch the glutes. This one is a really common stretch. It is a pigeon pose. The only difference here is I want to move in and out of that position. So I tend to modify this a little bit. A classic pigeon pose is where I put my knee forward and I just lean into that, right? I like to take more of a shin box approach because I'm gonna be doing shin boxes for hip mobility after I stretch this muscle group. So what I'm doing here is actually going to rotate my body and lean into that glute. Come back up. So now I'm moving into a deep stretch. I'm reaching with that hand, pushing that glute and trying to push this knee and my chest into the floor. My chest to my knee to the floor. As I reach forward and pushing that glute, and I'm gonna get a huge stretch. After I do that side, I would simply switch to this side and do the same thing. And we're just going through pumping range of motion. There's a lot of hip mobility drills you can do. I like 2 specific ones I'm gonna take you through. The main thing we're trying to do here is we're really just trying to A, loosen up and open up the hips, period, and B, work external and internal rotation. This is a good one for the external rotation, but it does work a little bit of internal rotation as well. You can support yourself in the back, or you can try to stay tall and keep all that tension in your hips and not use your body to support yourself. But what I'm gonna do is open up this as far as I can. So I wanna create as much space between my knees. So open this up, create as much space as possible, rotate to the other side, go down. So once again, as I rotate to this other side, creating as much space as I can, which is gonna create a pretty discomfortable stretch, but that's okay. And then I'm gonna rotate over, internally rotate this side until it hits the bottom, right? And now I'm just going about 10 per side. Again, if you wanna try to avoid using hand support, you can try to keep it all within your hips. A little bit more difficult, but that is good as well. We are almost done with the entire warm-up. Now we're gonna go into thoracic mobility. Your thoracic spine is responsible for all rotation and a lot of your extension. So if you're putting a bar on your back, if you're doing a front squat, if you want to press overhead, if you want to get a full range of motion chin up, if you want to be able to control rotation or resist rotation in a plank or any type of ab exercise that is pulling you each way, any unilateral movement, you need to be able to work thoracic mobility and extension properly before you get into that so you can execute it effectively. So the first thing we're going to do is foam roll the thoracic spine. Pretty simple. You're gonna literally lay on it, put your lower back as the starting point. Before I do any dynamic movement with my arms or anything, I actually like to try to release and pop my back, kind of like a chiropractor adjusting you. So what you're gonna wanna do, you're gonna hug yourself as wide as you possibly can, which if you've been to a chiropractor, you've probably seen happen before. Hug myself really big, as tight as I can, and then I'm literally gonna slowly go all the way up my spine, and then back down. Usually just 1 or 2 times is enough for you to pop the back and adjust yourself. Once you've released your thoracic spine, now I'm gonna really open it up by taking it through a full range of motion, reaching back, going into full extension, and then coming forward, rolling all along my spine on those muscles. Now that I've gone through the foam rolling aspect of the thoracic spine, I'm gonna go through the dynamic movement and stretches, which is gonna be a combination of stretching and mobility. And we're gonna start with something called thread the needle, and this one's gonna work on thoracic rotation. Knees are down on all fours. And what I wanna do is take this right hand to start with, palm facing up. I'm gonna reach underneath, sliding it across the floor, and I'm trying to rotate my torso as much as possible without shifting my hips. So I'm reaching and I'm trying to get all that rotation through my thoracic spine. Sometimes it helps to try to look up, and then I'm gonna come back through. Reach through, reach through, reach through, look up, getting all that rotation from that mid-trunk point. A way to progress this, you can also put your hand on your head and look up at your elbow, which opens it up a little bit more, and push that bottom hand, which is your post, into the floor. So So I'm coming in down here, getting a good flexion, and then I'm getting good rotation and extension. And you'll do 5 to 10 per side of those. All right, next we're gonna go into some thoracic extension. I like to do this with a band so I can create some external rotation and some tension on that range of motion and that movement. And using a bench so I can elevate my elbows up. You can do this on the floor and without a bench if you want. Really all you're trying to do is open up the lats, bring your elbows up, and create that thoracic extension that we need in order to do all these movements. But what I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna hold the band upwards, kind of like a no money drill, which is an old school way of working your rear delts and rotator cuffs. But I'm gonna get on my elbows and I'm just gonna create a little bit of tension. My goal here isn't to try to do no monies or create external rotation. Arguably a great exercise. I'm literally just gonna create a little bit of tension on this band. I don't need to be doing tons of external rotation. No money drills are arguably a good exercise. All I wanna do is create enough tension to give me something to go against here. Then I'm gonna keep my elbows static and I'm gonna sit into my hips while keeping some tension on this band. I get a huge benefit of thoracic extension. You'll feel your thoracic area working like crazy as you sit, and the further you sit into your heels, the more you're gonna feel that in there.